forget the sound for a second. Like, if somebody can hear the difference, that's cool. Again, I move the microphone a centimeter and it's going to sound drastically way more different than the sound that you're hearing, the difference between my Fractal and my, Mark IV. Like, it's pretty damn good these days, right? There is something really cool about walking into a studio and seeing a bunch of amps. And so I just got a new amp. Yeah. I just got the new Rev generator, which is fucking awesome.
Oh, how do you like that? Yeah.
It's awesome. Again, I don't mean this to diminish how awesome of an amp it is, but I can still smell the new like Tolex and like the tubes when and I'm just like, I love the smell of amps as much as I do the sound of them.
Dude, I say this all the time. People are like, oh, so, but like, you've got the real Boogie Mark IV. Like, what's the difference between that and the Fractal? It's like the smell. Like, and they go, ha, ha, ha. It's like, no, man, seriously. It's like, it's like, when
I've got a Mark IV here too.
Yeah, when you open a new Gibson guitar and they've just got that fragrance in the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That puts you in a space where the guitar suddenly sounds better.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about that for a second, because this conversation, I have this conversation with some people, and one of three things happens. Either they're like, "You're so full of shit," or they think I'm fucking with them, or they're like, I've never thought about that, and then you have a good conversation. So I am.
Why not all of the above?
All of the above. A little bit of all of it, right? I am of the belief, and I can only speak for myself. Maybe this is different to differing degrees with different people. I am I can say for certain that aside from just like the actual sonics, let's say the air moving and what's actually being picked up in the room, whatever, right? My brain will interpret those sonics different based off of a bunch of other external factors. Mm-hmm. So I've mentioned the story a couple times of when I started mixing in the box. And I used to mix on an SSL. Mm-hmm. And when I started mixing I started to have to do mixes in the box, and I had a really hard time doing it. And the weird thing is, when it started kind of clicking for me was when I was looking at something that actually was a very good graphical representation of an SSL. and so I've had this conversation with people about that. So with amps, how I refer to amps is like, there's an experience. Mm-hmm. It's not about it. I don't want to say it's not about the sound, because the experience can then make your brain interpret the sound differently. And I think when people talk about like the differences between real tube amps and fractals, or all the other stuff, like the plugins, I think a lot of the time, I mean, yeah, I can't argue what you hear or what you feel. Like, I can't feel what you feel. I can't hear what you hear. And ultimately, your brain is interpreting the sound waves and is taking in all these other things, right? So I think some people are more sensitive to the external factors than others, and other people block all that shit out, and it's just what's coming through the speakers that influences what they're hearing, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's a thing with real amps where the best analogy or the best example I like to think of is like, if you were an 18-year-old kid and you got a record deal, okay? I don't know if that's even, I don't even know if 18-year-old kids are like, I want a record deal these days. Maybe that doesn't happen. But whatever the scenario is, you're an 18-year-old kid and you somehow have come into the scenario where you get to go into a studio with maybe a producer who made one of your favorite albums or all of your favorite albums or whatever, right? And somebody else is paying for it, and you're like, oh my God, it's a dream come true. Mm-hmm. If you walk into the studio and you walk into the studio and it's a big empty room with a pair of speakers, an IKEA desk with a keyboard and a mouse, and like an SKB case with a Kemper sitting on the floor. Can you make a great record? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You get your pull out your guitar out of your case, you plug into that Kemper, you have your download your packs that probably sound really fucking good. Mm-hmm. And the engineer or the producer has all his toys in the box and it's all great. And you can make a great sounding album if you've written great songs and you're doing it right. It's great. But you can't tell me, and I've come full circle on this because I almost like went kind of not minimalist, but I've pared things down a lot. Mm-hmm. And I'm almost now retracting from that. I'm like, no. There's something missing now. Like I need to bring shit back. So going back to that example, you can't tell me that that's going to be the same experience, which then will produce the same quote unquote product, the final result. If that kid walked into a studio and it had a rack of all of his amps that he'd only ever seen on the internet and he'd only ever read about in guitar forums, mm-hmm. He'd never in a million years thought he'd be able to actually plug into one. And there's 10 of them.
Yep.
And it's like, you know what we're going to do the first day? What are we going to do? We're just going to plug into every single one of these and you're just going to play.
Yep.
Are we going to record anything? No. I just want you to play with this shit. Like, these are toys.
Yep.
Have fun. And so if you do that, I have a really hard time believing that the final result of that album or that record or whatever you're doing, even if it's just that recording of that day, I have a hard time believing that that's not going to be better in some way. And I say better because talk about context and relative. Like, what's the criteria of better? We can define that all we want. But you can't tell me that that's not going to be better than if you just come and plug into a Kemper and be like, all right, start tracking.
No, absolutely. And I mean, that's literally why I have this stuff too. It looks cool and it's fun.
And that's okay.
And
not in like a bullshit, well, I need to fake it before I make it kind of thing. It's what you said, it's the fun thing. Yeah. And it's the like, remind yourself why you're doing this. And you know what?
Yeah.
90% of it is bullshit, but 10% of it is magic. You know, like a fucking diesel VH4 through a boogie oversized cab. If you've never done that before and you finally get to do it, that's an experience you'll never forget. Yeah. And you just immediately learn things about, one, why people consider it great, and two, why 90% of the stuff about it is actually bullshit. But still that 10% of like, it's great and this is why. And you're like, oh, I like playing music. This is something that I want to do. Can we start recording something? I think you're just fucking bang on, man. Like, not from the like, well, you need to, like show the tools, but yeah, it's because then like there's no, but if I had done something different, you don't die wondering, basically.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is like, the playing devil's advocate to that. I also work with people who don't give a shit about that. And they almost find it, they find it distracting and they find it like it gets in the way of their creative flow. Mm-hmm. So if it was kind of like, okay, now we're going to do the double. And they're like, okay, cool. Let's go move the amp or move the mics and let's plug in a different head. They're like, what are you doing? Like, I'm chomping at the bit here. Like, I don't care.
Let me play.
Right. So you gotta, I mean, I guess that's one of the things that you gotta be able to recognize as a producer, like who are you dealing with?
Yeah.
Do you need to provide somebody with an experience to get them like motivated and enthusiastic and kind of, get that performance? Or is that dog and pony show going to be a hindrance because somebody just wants to get to work? And I'll tell you right now, if I've got a diesel VH4 with that Mesa oversized cab, I've got 10 patches on my Fractal that, again, remove all the other stuff. If we're just listening at the end of the day through the speakers and we're comparing just physics or like comparing what the sound waves are doing, the difference is minute.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But how that person plays, what that experience is like, who knows? Maybe they come into the studio the next day and they're like, dude, I was so pumped up. I just want to play. And they write, and while they're trying out all the amps, they write the riff that ends up being their career song.
Yep.
That probably doesn't happen when you're just like, I've got a preset that I've used on the last 10 records that you've heard. We're going to use that, plug in, start playing. Mm-hmm. And so again, I consider myself relatively objective. So I just like to acknowledge what things are for what they are. And so
but you're also a facilitator.
Yeah.
You know, for lots of different things. Are you facilitating someone getting the job done?
Yeah.
Are you facilitating them getting inspired? Are you facilitating, I don't know, like helping someone who's new maybe to the process or the industry, like understand the process? There's as you said right at the start, you wear a lot of hats in that position.